Now, to guide this session, we are privileged to have an esteemed chair, Professor Pinaki Chakravarti. Professor Pinaki Chakravarti is a visiting distinguished professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, and vice chairman of the Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur. He previously served as the director of NIPFP and served as governance and public financial management reform specialist at the Asian Development Bank. A leading expert in fiscal federalism, public finance, and decentralization, he has held several important policy roles, including economic advisor to the 14th Finance Commission and the member of the Advisory Council to the 15th Finance Commission. He also chaired the Kerala Public Expenditure Review Committee and has served as a member secretary of the Fiscal Statistics Committee constituted by the National Statistical Commission. Professor Chakravarti has worked with UNICEF as Chief of Social Policy and Head of Field Office for Kerala and Tamil Nadu. He has authored influential books and widely published on fiscal policy and intergovernmental relations. He holds his MPhil and a PhD in economics from the Center for Development Studies, JNU. We are happy to have you with us, sir, and we look forward to your valuable guidance in steering this session. Professor K. Gayatri, currently a consultant with the UN Women and former professor at the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and a distinguished scholar in public finance. With over 3 decades of research experience, she specializes in public expenditure management, fiscal policy analysis, program performance budgeting, industrial policy, and subsidies. She earned her PhD in public finance from the University of Mysore and has received advanced training at globally reputed institutions, including the John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, and Duke University. Professor Gayatri has led and contributed to numerous high-level policy studies for key government bodies, including the Finance Commissions of India, the Planning Commissions of India, the Pay Commissions, the State Finance Commissions of Karnataka, and the Expenditure Reforms Commission. An accomplished author and editor, she has published extensively in leading journals and edited volumes. Her recent book, Public Expenditure in India, Policies and Development Outcomes, provides a comprehensive empirical analysis of the evolution, composition, and impact of public expenditure in India at both the central and subnational levels, with a particular focus on expenditure reforms, accountability, and development outcomes. It is a privilege to have you, ma'am, with us, and we are certain that your insights will greatly enrich our discussions today. Dr. Ashwati Ranjal Varghese is an assistant professor of economics at the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, where she coordinates the institute's research pillar on public expenditure. Her research focuses on the political economy of fiscal policy, quality and efficiency of public expenditure, intergovernmental transfers, financing for development, and disaster risk expenditure in the context of climate-induced fiscal vulnerabilities. She also deals with critically with expenditure rationalization strategies and alternatives emerging from evolving macro fiscal conditions. She earned her PhD in development studies from the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and has previously served as an economics manager at Canara Bank and held academic positions at CUSAT and Christ University, Bangalore. Dr. Ashwati was selected as a study of the United States Institute Scholar in 2024 by the U.S. Department of the States of Education and Cultural Affairs, representing India along with the scholars from 17 developing nations. She was also among the selected participants at the 8th Linda Global Laureate Meeting in Economic Sciences, Germany in 2025. Welcome to the session, ma'am, and we eagerly look forward to your thoughts and perspectives on this important theme. Dr. Sumlata B.S. is an assistant professor at the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation. She earned her PhD in economics from the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai. Before joining GIFT, she served as an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at the Central University of Tamil Nadu. Her research interests include development issues of India and Kerala economy and public finance issues with a specialization in fiscal federalism. She has published research articles in the reputed journals including Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, and the Indian Economic Journal, Journal of Human Rights and Social Work, Agenda, the International Journal of Community and Social Development. She has undertaken research projects supported by the National Commission for Women, National Human Rights Commission, and the Indian Council of Social Science Research. She also contributes to opinion articles to national dailies. Welcome to the session, ma'am, and we eagerly look forward to your thoughts and perspectives on the important theme. I now request our esteemed chairperson to kindly take over the proceedings and guide us through the session. Thank you.
Thank you. This session is on grants in aid. Given the structure of the program, I believe this is on grant in aids by the Finance Commission to the states or the overall grant in aid transfers from the center to the state. Fine. Finance Commission transfers, okay, in the form of grant units, okay. We have three presenters here, Professor K. Gayatri, former professor, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, Dr. Shumalata B.S., Assistant Professor, GIFT, Dr. Ashwati Rachel Varghese, Assistant Professor, GIFT. Dr. Gayatri is joining online. I would request you to make, since there are two presenters and we have 1.5 hours, I would request you to make presentations for around 20 minutes, and then we can have half an hour for discussion. May I request Professor Gayatri to make her presentation. Professor Gayatri?
Good morning, Professor Pinaki. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
I think there's some problem with my camera. I'm trying to fix it. Not to waste time, if we can start with the other presenters.
Okay. So would like to.
Is it okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So Shumalata will make her presentations and then probably Ashwati, and then we'll request Professor Gayatri.
So, very good morning to one and all present here. In today's presentation, I'm going to make some reflections on grants and aid allocations to the state by the Finance Commission. So, yesterday's panel discussions by some of the professors have already discussed about the position of grants in aid, allotted by the Finance Commission to the states, touching upon the revenue deficit grant and its implications for state finances for some of the states. So, my presentation, I'm focusing on the overall grants in aid that is given to the states. And also in the second part, I'll be looking at specifically on the revenue deficit grant. To begin with, as we all aware, there are main three channels for which the resources that distribute to the states, mainly in the form of tax devolution that is dealt by Article 270 of the Constitution, and then then by under the Article 275(1), which deals with the grants in aid, specific grants to the states by the union government from their consolidated fund. So later we have the article, that is Article 282, which provides discretionary grants to the states, mainly in the form of centrally sponsored schemes. So this table gives the share of tax share as well as FC grant share in total FC transfers. If you look at my focus is on FC grants, we can see that there is a decline in the FC grants from 19.4% to 18.3% when it comes to 15 to 16 FC. So there is a decline in the FC grants. Yeah, so if you look at the tax share projected for 26-27, which is rupees 16.44 lakh crore, and budgeted figure for 26-27 is rupees 15.26 lakh crore. There is 1 lakh some crore difference in the projected FC share as well as the budgeted share by the union government. And there is also there is a difference in the projected FC grants as well as in the actual grants given by the 15th FC. It was projected was 10.1 lakh crore, while the actual grants received by the SAES were only 8 lakh crore. There is 2 lakh crore differences in the projected as well as the actual received. And the decline in FC grants received may be due to the conditionalities associated with the grants given to the local bodies. And the 16th Finance Commission has put more conditions for availing the local body grants. This may further reduce the actual grants received by the local bodies in the coming years. So if we look at the FC grants trend, we can see that there is only 6.2% growth in the FC grants from 15 to 16%. As I mentioned, the overall decline in the share of FC grants. So moving on to the FC and non-FC grants share, this actually I have used this table to show the volume of FC grants and the non-FC grants. We can see that the non-FC grants is huge compared to the FC grants. Under this non-FC grants, the major contributor is the CSS, centrally sponsored schemes, which is conditional, which is the conditional grant, which is a discretionary grant by the union government, which is more in conditional in nature. And the matching grants required for from the state governments and various conditionalities associated with the CSS actually reduces the fiscal space available to the state governments. And this has been widely criticized during the time of the preparation of the 16th Finance Commission as well. And this is the, this is a table because it's a huge table. That's why I reduced the size. And this gives the various kinds of grants in aid over various finance commissions. The previous commissions, if you look at different kinds of grants have been given. When it comes to the 14th and 15th Finance Commission, they have brought down to mainly 4 or 5 grants. And in the last Finance Commission, we had revenue deficit grant and sector-specific, state-specific grants and grants to local bodies as well as disaster risk management. But now in the 16th Finance Commission, we have only 2 type of grants, that grants to local bodies and disaster risk management, which includes state disaster response fund as well as the mitigation fund. So that part will be further analyzed by Ashwati in her presentation. So this gives the overall the share of various states in the grants in aid, total grants in aid across various FCs. And I look at the last 2 column, that is 15th FC and 16th FC. If we see that, I'll explain that the FC grant share has increased from 15 FC to 16 FC for states such as Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Haryana, Jharkhand, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Uttar Pradesh. But for states like Arunachal, mainly the northeastern states such as Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Chhattisgarh, then some of the other states like Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Punjab, Sikkim, Tripura, Uttarakhand, and West Bengal, there shows a decline in their share in the 16th FC. So this in this table, the change in tax share from 15 to 16. Then third column, which explains the grants in aid share from 15 to 16, and the final is total FC transfers, including tax and the grants in aid. So this actually, because when we look at in the 16th Finance Commission, we had a horizontal criteria, new criteria added, that is contribution to GDP. So because of that, particular criteria, some of the southern states like Karnataka, Kerala, we have gained in the tax share in the 16th Finance Commission. But when it comes to the grant, mainly the discontinuation of revenue deficit grant, so the grant share has been there is a decline in the grant share. So if you take the overall, the grants plus, because grants are also very important as far as states development is concerned. So we take both combined effect, we can see that some of the increase in the tax share actually offset the due to the decline in the grants in aid. So most of the northeastern states shows a decline in the share, both in the tax share as well as FC grants, along with the states such as Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, and West Bengal. These are the main the special categories, the general purpose, general categories of states, which are going to affect very badly in the coming years because of the reduction in, the discontinuation of revenue deficit grant. So for Kerala, there is an increase in tax share while the share of FC grants declines. In Karnataka, there is increase in both the share of taxes as well as the grants. So this is the same, the table which I have given in the form of graph. So this is with respect to the tax share, and you can see the states which are having a decline in the tax share, and the first part is the increase in the tax share. And this is with respect to the grants. So here we can see the changes of the states' positions. So we come in the second part, including Punjab, then Himachal Pradesh, West Bengal, along with the northeastern states. And this is the combined effect of the FC transfers in the Assistance Finance Commission. So now I come to the revenue deficit grant, its discontinuation. So it's already like explained by the previous speakers, yesterday speakers. So they have given the logic of why, you know, this FC has not taken the revenue deficit grant. So in our assessment of state finance, we find that expenditure pattern of states, even for expenditure that is committed to salaries and pension, vary significantly. In addition, the expenditure on subsidies and transfer has increased worryingly in recent years. There is also ample scope to increase tax revenue by improving tax efficiency. So we conclude that the reason for the persistent revenue deficit of some of the states lie in these factors. Indeed, revenue deficit grants create adverse insensitive whereby the expectation of such grants encourages states to propagate rather than address the root cause of the revenue shortage. So this is the explanation given by the FC, so for the discontinuing of the revenue deficit grant. So this the share of revenue deficit in FC grants. This is with respect to the with regard to the 15th FC. So if you look at the share of total revenue deficit grant in overall FC grants, we can see that it's huge. So this is overall to the states. And if you look at, though there is a decline in the last period, but still it constitutes highest proportion in the total FC grants, that is statutory grants. Yeah, coming to the states which were getting revenue deficit grant in the 15th Finance Commission, we can see that the proportion of revenue deficit grant in their total grants, we can see the states like Andhra Pradesh, then Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, our state, Manipur, then Mizoram, Nagaland, Punjab, Tripura, as well as West Bengal and Uttarakhand. These states were, their share in proportion to the total grants given to them is very, very high. So definitely these states are going to have a severe impact. And some of the states I have already mentioned, they have a decline in their tax share as well. So combined this tax share, decline in the tax share as well as decline in the grants in aid, so they are going to have a very fiscal crisis in the coming years. Yeah, I'm just coming to conclusion. So there is a shift from traditional gap filling approach to a reform linked fiscal discipline framework, and states are now expected to address revenue deficit through their internal resource mobilization. The question is whether these states will be able to raise enough revenue and finance their revenue deficit or whatever emergency requirements the state will be having. So that is the major question that is in front of us. And yeah, I'll come to a conclusion because this is based on the preliminary understanding. So there is a decline in overall share of FC grants to the states, and removal of revenue deficit grant affects largely the northeastern states, that these states are also affected by decline in the tax share. So under the FC grants, revenue deficit grant was some kind of unconditional grant. So the removal of unconditional part of grant from the FC grants, that actually reduces the discretionary space of the states. And all other grants, including the non-FC grants, which are conditional in nature. So we may not have any kind of the flexibility in using those grants for our development purposes. And also the FC grants are not based on specific proportion of gross revenue. There won't be any proportional increase in the FC grants in proportion to the growth of the gross revenue of the union government, unlike the tax share, which is a proportion of the divisible pool. So that is also one of the issue. And there should be some gap filling grants in order to address the deficit of the state. So this is my preliminary understanding.
Thank you, Sumulata, for a very comprehensive presentation on the grants by FCs and its implications on state's fiscal space, and also finishing the presentation within the time provided. Thank you very much. I would now request Ashwati to make her presentation.
Very good morning to one and all. In continuation with the discussion on grants and aid, particularly with regard to Finance Commission grants and all. So this I would like to discuss with you today regarding the 11th chapter of the Finance Commission report, which is nothing but it's about the disaster risk financing and the role of Finance Commission. So the presentation is titled as Does Formula Design Influence Equity in Disaster Risk Financing? A comparative analysis of 15th and 16th Finance Commission approach. So this is the broad outline of the presentation. I would like to touch upon the disaster risk management and the institutional framework, and then having a comparative analysis of the methodology used by 15th Finance Commission and 16th Finance Commission, and then little bit of discussion about why there is the rationale behind giving maximum weightage for the past expenditure and what are the caveats there. And then the important part of the allocation pattern under 15th FC and 16th FC, a comparison, and other issues flagged by 16th Finance Commission, followed by a concluding remark. So to start with, we know that in India, the institutional framework revolving around the disaster risk management were in place with the Disaster Management Act of 2005. And the Disaster Management Act of 2005 actually put in place the national level, state level, and district level disaster management authority headed by the respective leaders. And we have constitutional provisions as well with regard to disaster risk financing, which is nothing but Article 275. So here I would like to give a broad outline about the evolution of financing disaster risk management and fiscal federalism. So right from Second Finance Commission to Eighth Finance Commission, we just had a scheme of margin money. So which kept apart some money for relief on account of natural calamities. But then after that, we started seeing a structural transformation from margin money scheme. And then up to 16th Finance Commission, we can see that it is an institutionalized mechanism, including mitigation fund and adaptation fund. So 9th Finance Commission, they have replaced the sharing pattern with 75 to 25% from 50 to 50-50. And then consequently, 10th Finance Commission introduced National Fund for Calamity Relief Fund. And then we have 11th Finance Commission actually mentioned about setting apart a corpus of rupees 500 crore, which should be recouped from the surcharges on central taxes. So after that, 12th Finance Commission also expanded some list of disasters into it. And then from 13th Finance Commission onwards, they have done little bit of consolidation regarding SDRF and NDRF, State Disaster Risk Response and Relief Fund and National Disaster Relief Fund. Then 14th Finance Commission also added some bit of disasters into it. And 15th Finance Commission onwards, we could see that there was a paradigm shift in the way they have approached to the fund allocation. So apart from the past expenditure, they started incorporating the disaster risk profile of the respective state to the past expenditure. So 16th Finance Commission actually improved the formula, but we will see that in the following slides, what are the exact problems associated with this formula. So I will briefly describe like what was the approach basically taken by the 15th Finance Commission with respect to disaster fund allocation. So this was the broader pattern of the fund allocation, which is giving 70% of the weightage to expenditure and exposure 30%, which is splitted according to area 15% and population 15%. So this particular figure was actually weighted with the disaster risk index, and they had a formula of calculating the disaster risk index, which is the addition of probability of hazards and vulnerability. So probability of hazards was having 70% weightage and vulnerability was having 30% weightage. Here in GIFT, while we were giving the inputs to the 16th Finance Commission, we have actually pointed out what is the structural flaw in this particular methodology. Because in the traditional risk theory, they follow a multiplicative approach of probability of hazards, vulnerability, and exposure. So having replaced it with the additive methodology, there could be a lot of distortions in the allocation pattern. So that was one of the criticism that we flagged for the 16th Finance Commission, and we are happy that they noted that criticism, and we got a mention also in the 16th Finance Commission report. And it was a collaborative work with our research scholar Riju. Apart from this, the second criticism was on vulnerability, proxying vulnerability. So in the 15th Finance Commission, they proxied it with below poverty line population. So that also we criticized with the theoretical backing. So the final score they arrived at after accounting for 5% inflation. So this was the scoring system they followed in the 15th Finance Commission report for assessing the probability of hazard and vulnerability. So hazards, they mentioned only 4 hazards. Apart from that, all of them were culminated into others category. So the disaster, the hazard which is having the highest probability used to get 15, then medium 10 and low 5. And poverty, as they have proxied it for the vulnerability, below 13%, they were getting a score of 10, and between 13 and 26, they were getting a score of 20, and between 26 and 40%, it was high vulnerability with a score of 30. So now I'll come to the present Finance Commission, how they have accounted for all this criticism and how they have revised it and what are the problems associated with it. So the allocation formula, they broadly kept it as the sum of expenditure and the disaster with a weightage of 70 and 30. And the methodology for disaster risk index has been changed to the interactive term of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So hazard here is a weighted measure. Usually we have 10 listed disasters as per the Ministry of Home Affairs. So they have taken 8 out of 10 disasters and added 2 new disasters into it, which is heat waves and cloudburst, lightning and all. So altogether, Finance Commission is considering the 10 disaster with a weightage of past expenditure related to those particular hazards. So that is how they have revised the formula. Now we'll see component-wise how they have approached it and what are the loopholes that one could point out. So the main philosophy or main question before the Finance Commission when they approached the hazard was how hazard-prone is each Indian state. So what they have done, suppose for instance we have taken a particular disaster, flooding. So the probability of flooding has been calculated. You rank the states according to the probability of flooding, and how they have considered the probability of flooding, it is depending upon the past incidents of flooding. So after ranking it, they have bifurcated it into 5 categories. Basically, they have found out a percentile. So they have bifurcated into 5 categories and assigned a random score ranging from 3 to 15. So which is a multiple of 3. So for example, if 5 categories are there, they have assigned a score of 3 to category 1, which is least hazardous, and 6, 9, 12, and 15 is the most hazardous class. Applying weights to the weights based on the actual disaster expenditure for the respective hazards. I hope it is clear. So this is the broader weighting pattern of hazards, because they have identified that flooding is the most prominent hazards in the country. So 50% of weightage has gone to flooding, and accordingly we have like different kinds of weightages for the listed disasters. And here one should note that whatever disasters have been added fresh to the disaster list, they have tried to adjust it with a 2% weightage, because they don't have a previous record of expenditure. So finally, this is the calculation. The flood score, whatever you have got from there, multiplied with or weighted with the respective past expenditure figure. So out of all these things, what you will get is a composite score of hazard. So which is justifiable according to the theory, and it is backed by the theory. But what is the problem here exactly is, in the broader allocation pattern itself, you have a higher weightage for expenditure. Again, it is getting weighted. Hazard is getting weighted with the past expenditure. So it is almost like a double counting. Next, let me explain about the second component of the disaster risk index, which is exposure. So here, the main question is, is being asked is, how many people could potentially be harmed by a disaster, which is very important, because Commission has taken the relative population share for exposure, for proxying exposure. But what is the problem here? Theoretically, exposure is more than a head count. So they are justifying on the grounds that they have taken into account multiple hazards. So they are assuming the fact that one person in one particular state may be faced with at least one hazard. So that is not a very convincing justification provided, because the theory categorically says that it is hazard zone population may be the accurate component rather than the absolute figure of population. So how they have scaled it? Suppose one can ask a question. We have a lot of huge, enormous heterogeneity associated with the population share in our country. So how could you scale it actually? So the state which is having the highest share of population will get a score of 25, and state which is least populous will get a scale of 1. So the range of the scale, we have to keep it in mind, that is varying from 1 to 25. And earlier for the hazard component, the range of the scale was varying from 3 to 15. Now coming to the vulnerability component of disaster risk index. So earlier Finance Commission, as I mentioned, they were proxying vulnerability with the below poverty line population. But here they have changed it with the per capita net state domestic product, NSDP. But then what happened, what they have actually done is they have normalized the figure, and then what does it convey basically? So a state which is having higher per capita income will be having low vulnerability. Then you will have to invert the score. So normalize and inverted the score. But the problem here is you have just replaced it with a scalar number, right? So earlier it was below poverty line population, and now it is per capita NSDP. So when you see the rank correlation between per capita NSDP and your below poverty line population, it is a clear-cut negative rank correlation, which is as high as minus 0.76. So which means that the ordering of the state in the vulnerability has not changed exactly. So whatever states which were vulnerable before in the 15th Finance Commission, they are almost standing in the same position. So theoretically, vulnerability component cannot be a scalar measure. So it is a composite index. So as per IPCC's assessment report 6, the vulnerability index is calculated as a ratio of sensitivity index to the adaptive capacity index. So these were the problems associated with each components of the formula. But then let us also look into disaster risk index as a whole. What is the problem? So when you take the contributions of, variance contribution of each component to overall disaster risk index, you can see that it is majorly driven by exposure. Because as I mentioned, the scale of the exposure is 1 to 25 and scale of hazard is 3 to 12. And then vulnerability scale is 1 to 1.5 after normalization and inverting the score, 1 to 1.5. So there is a range issue there. So the whole disaster risk index is driven by the population, basically. So, and the entire allocation pattern is driven by the quantity of expenditure. So larger states will be spending, will be having a large amount of expenditure. So the formula is, in practice, we can say that it is a population weighted hazard index with a cosmetic vulnerability adjustment. Little more time. How to correct this, basically? So we can go for hazard measure as per unit hazard intensity. Instead of weighting hazard with past expenditure again, so we can weight it with the past hazard intensity or the frequency of the hazard faced by each state. And definitely exposure is not a measure of absolute poverty and population. As it should be measured as a hazard zone population. And vulnerability should be a multi-dimensional index and it should not be a scalar one. As I mentioned, there is a range dominance problem here. So how to overcome this? So explicitly assign weights to each component of the disaster risk index. So then the weights will be equal to 1. With regard to past expenditure approach, I've already mentioned that what is the problem that we are having with the past expenditure approach. But then what they have done is the new Finance Commission have actually taken the inflation adjusted figure across 11 years and they added a buffer of 10% to it. Because why they have added, the rationale behind is whatever was the past expenditure may not be sufficient to face your future hazards because the climate induced hazards are increasing. And again, they have given a cushion of 5% to account for the inflation. But then these are the problems associated with the past expenditure, which I have flagged earlier. Apart from that, Finance Commission itself in its report pointed out some accounting anomalies. Because when you park fund in the SDRF thing, it will be there in the public accounts. So what states generally do is they deduct it from the public account, but they will not account it under the particular head of the CAG. So some states are under-reporting their expenditure. So in that case, expenditure being a major component of the disaster fund allocation, that itself can create ambiguity and anomaly. And we have done an exercise of how is the closing balance of the state behaving. So we could find that result, I have not furnished it here. We could find that the closing balance ratio has been higher for majority of the state, which is receiving higher disaster risk allocation. So which means that states are not actually spending on this account and accumulating their funds there. So Finance Commission has taken a note of this, and what it has done, if that allocation fund is more than average of the allocated fund is more than 3 years, then they will withhold the fund allocation from here onwards. Now coming to the exciting part of the whole formula and the associated allocation pattern. So I hope it is visible. So these are the states which we categorized as major gainers, moderate gainers, moderate losers, and major losers. So if you could see that Maharashtra, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka are the major gainers in the allocation formula. And the gain is with respect to the percentage share. Gain in the percentage share compared to 16th and 15th Finance Commission.
Green shades.
Green shades. Dark green shades are major gainers. And then they are moderate gainers and moderate losers. This is for the entire 5 years. So the entire allocation. So allocation has increased. 1.28 lakh crore was the 15th Finance Commission allocation, overall allocation to the SDRF fund. Now it has increased to 2.04 lakh crore. Almost. But then what drives this? So when I say there are losers, moderate losers and moderate gainers and all, what drives this? Of course, the disaster risk index formula drives this. So each component of the disaster risk index, which is having the highest weightage exposure, was having the highest, the highest representation in the formula. So Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra, it was the DRI of these particular states were majorly driven by the population because the exposure is 14. And if one can contest that the hazard score is also high for these states. But when you are assigning higher, weighted expenditure to these hazard scores, generally this bigger states will be having bigger allocation of expenditure also. And we should take a note on like high vulnerability states, but they are losing out in terms of exposure. So basically, because it is being proxied by the population. So Assam, Jharkhand, then Arunachal Pradesh, even Andhra Pradesh are losing out when they are having high high hazards also, but they are having lower exposure, because lower exposure is limiting the DRIs in many cases. So with respect to Andhra Pradesh, strong hazard but lower exposure limits the DRI. So this is the case with the disaster risk, index, and how it is driven by exposure and unduly weighted past expenditure hazard scores. So when you compare the disaster score with the allocation pattern, broadly it looks like justified, because the disaster score, whatever they have prepared, it is broadly aligning with the allocation pattern, except for the state of Orissa. Because Orissa, if you could see, Orissa is the only Indian state which is proactively investing on mitigation measures related to natural disaster, especially with respect to cyclones. If you see the past incidents and the past examples, like past instances, we could see that the death toll was quite minimal compared to all other states. So they were proactive in investing for all these things. But Odisha is the state which has lost out completely in this Finance Commission allocation pattern. So because it is having a low exposure, this thing. So what are the main conclusion which I want to flag here? Exposure penalizes the hazard intensity basically. And per capita income is the proxy for the vulnerability. So when you proxy it, the states which is having more hazard or more exposure will not be taken into account, because you get a minimum representation in the disaster risk formula. So low exposure score structurally caps your DRI, which Chhattisgarh and Kerala are the classic examples. So these are the main observations which I drew from the 16th Finance Commission report. So what we can do is, like, instead of taking the population as a population percentage, we could really look for the hazard prone population. And also, I still don't understand why Finance Commission is not making an attempt to make NDMA to have an institutionalized disaster score, because it's not a Finance Commission job to go and get the vulnerability index or disaster risk index. So why can't we interest the agencies associated with the vulnerability and disaster, and we can have an institutionalized score so that we can have a historical pattern of vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashrati. Very comprehensive, analytically very rich presentations, and with a very concrete policy suggestions. Thank you for doing this. I will come back to it when we have discussions on your presentations. May I now request Dr. Gayatri to...
Yes, Professor Pinaki, thank you very much for giving me this chance to come in later, but unfortunately I have not been able to fix my camera through the presentation also. But then what I'll do is I'll just flag some issues, okay, because already a detailed coverage of grant and aid, the status, and what has been the recommendation made by the 16th Finance Commission. The comparisons have been provided by both Dr. Sumalata and Disaster Dr. Ashwati has made a very detailed presentation. Okay, before that, let me thank Dr. Joseph and Gulati Institute for this invitation extended to me and for facilitating my online participation as such. Thank you very much once again. Yeah, since yesterday I've been listening to a very good discussion which has been happening on the recommendations made by the 16th Finance Commission. the whole galaxy of public finance experts who have actually provided a lot of insights into how exactly these recommendations are, sort of, are going to sort of impact on the states and what have been the major issues and issues like that. But I just thought, of course, mainly I'll be focusing on granting aid related issues. This also is from the perspective of students. Okay, basically to identifying some kind of a research questions emerging from the recommendations which have been made by the 16th Finance Commission, and one or two on the overall recommendations, if the chair permits me. I'll just, because there is a very detailed discussion on some of these efficiency related aspects. Let me start with that. I think one of the most debated issues has been the inclusion or use of the contribution by states to the GDP as an efficiency parameter. Just, I think, a very brief kind of a this thing on this. I think in Karnataka, led by Professor Govind Rao, we really looked into this particular aspect in a very, very detailed manner. And we realized the fact that while, tax effort could be used as one of the kind of criteria which has been used by the previous finance commissions, some states tend to have a very high share in the zero rated exports, software exports. That's where I think states lose out on their contribution to the, tax kind of a distinct performance as such. So I think this is one aspect which was taken into account, and that's how I think this particular variable has been used. And as I said, basically this particular these issues which I am trying to highlight are from the perspective of future public finance research which can be taken up. When we had this discussion when the commission met us in the Southern Regional Conference, there was an elaborate discussion on efficiency parameters. What are the other variables that could be used? And I think while many of them were consulted or examined, like HDI and things like that, issues pertaining to data and other aspects were sort of debated extensively. And I think I'm just guessing this could be one of the reasons why share in GDP, a state share in GDP has been used as one of the. So one could certainly, as a future research, one could certainly look at what are the other parameters that could be looked into. I think certainly the directional change which has been brought about by the 16th Finance Commission, while still admitting the fact that equity is the prime should be the prime focus, I think efficiency is an aspect which cannot be given a due, which cannot be sidelined, and it should be given a little bit of due share. So to that extent, whatever directional change has taken place, with the kind of a future focus on what are the other variables that could look into in using as an efficiency parameter, could certainly be worked on. But I think for now, I think there is a directional change which has been brought about by the 16th Finance Commission. As I said, the weightage, the other parameters, these are issues that one could certainly look at. Coming to the core issues on the grant in aid, again, I think there was an elaborate discussion on the RDG, revenue deficit grants. And I think many have actually yesterday also taken a view that this is quite disastrous for some of the states which are revenue sort of starved. The fiscal stress is certainly going to go up, and then we need to certainly look at, this is one kind of a recommendation which is really going to affect some of these states. I just wanted to sort of bring to the notice of the floor the fact how this revenue deficit grant position has changed over a period of time. So if we look at the impact of, the recommendations made by 12th Finance Commission when they gave the direct relief, most of the state governments went back to revenue balance position as such. I think this was a situation both in the decade of 2000 and also early 2010, the decade of 2010 as such. So, could the Finance Commission have found a middle ground rather than scrapping it or sort of completely, stopping the revenue deficit grant uniformly across all the states as such? So this is where actually I think another important question that comes up. And this is what we were actually discussing. I think Dr. Joseph was also there in the Hyderabad conference. See, the composition of revenue deficit, or if you're looking at the kind of nature of expenditure, I'm typically not talking about the revenue deficit method used by the finance commissions as such. It's being extended a little. But there are states like Kerala which argue that, where investments in education health are quite high. One has to certainly look at, ways of accommodating this revenue deficit as such. Also, we're just looking at the kind of the expenditure of the states on some of these committed items, be it your salary, pension, and sort of interest payments. Then it ranges, actually, it widely ranges from about 29% in Jharkhand to over 70%. In fact, some of the years it has gone beyond 100 for Punjab and states like that. And even Kerala, Tamil Nadu have a very large share in the salary component in the total kind of a revenue expenditure as such. A related aspect is about the subsidies. Subsidies, the Finance Commission also talks about it, and even the data that we have looked at, and now there has been a sharp increase in the share of subsidy for almost, from almost 75,000 crore in 1819 to 4.4 lakh crore, and almost 20% of the revenue expenditure is constituted by the subsidies as such. Here, I'm not really talking about whether the center is empowered to give these subsidies or states are empowered to give these subsidies. I'm basically talking about from the point of view of public finances of the country, in what direction we are taking forward, be it expenditure or revenue, and the fiscal discipline as such. So if we are really talking about that, the basic question that has to be addressed is about the definition of subsidies and the kind of data that we have for us to take any kind of policy decisions. RBI Bulletin publishes the data as given by the CAG, and it is being very clearly brought out in the studies that the subsidy definition is not uniform across states. While some states are actually, reporting subsidy, even a state which is reporting in a very comprehensive manner is not really providing the data in the right manner as such. So this has been a kind of a observation made in an NIPP study also about the kind of variation between what is reported in the public domain and what are the actual subsidies. How do we really define these? Okay, so when we are talking about some of these, should we really go beyond just talking about scrapping or stopping the revenue deficit grant? Should we really go beyond this and take a look at what is the composition of even the revenue deficit, the so-called revenue deficit? So while, the 16th Finance Commission could have found a middle ground by way of certainly providing resources to the states which are fiscally stressed, I think the other states, there could have been an incentive. I'm sure there are a lot of methodological issues which come out of this, but I think this is a fundamental issue. And first of all, we have absolutely no clue whether the subsidy figures of one state can be compared with other, and can we have a kind of can we stick our neck out and say that this is the subsidy kind of this thing of the governments across the country as such, all the state governments, and whether even the central government is justified in providing some of these schemes, which I think there was some discussion about this also. Even the center is indulging in some of these kind of transfer payments and stuff like that. So this is a very important question that has to be looked into. And a connecting question that I think, again, we'll have to really examine in a very, very detailed manner is related to the fiscal roadmap, which has been provided by the 16th Finance Commission. So the roadmap is by 2030, the states will have to adhere to 3%, and the central government has to 3.5%. 0.5 is basically towards the support that the center extends to the states by way of capital investment support. Here again, and see, while again, going back to the policy changes which have happened, we may have actually dropped the kind of importance assigned to revenue deficit. But should we really assume that we completely give away this focus? Do we not really look at the composition of the fiscal deficit? I think yesterday, again, there was some discussion about whether the 3% is something which has to remain continuously the same, static at the same level for each state. given the fact that our own, the basis on which this fiscal deficit was derived, based on the household savings, has it not undergone any change? I think this is where I think yesterday, I think Dr. Arun made a very interesting presentation on the flexible targeting of fiscal deficit as such. I think so. The future research which happens, I think, has to certainly take into account some of these aspects. And then coming to the issue of the local body grants as such. Again, I think the Finance Commission has missed out an opportunity to learn from the existing literature and the findings which have reported that these conditionalities have led to a situation where the states have not been able to completely utilize the grants. So I think Sumalata also made a point that, while 10 lakh was the grant, it was only 8 lakh rupees. I think yesterday Dr. Pinaki also talked about how much of saving has happened to this union on account of, like some of these grants and, like which have not been provided to the states as such. So given the fact that the conditionalities, and there is adequate empirical evidence showing that some of these conditionalities have not really resulted, have led to a situation where the states have not been in a position to completely utilize the grants. And in fact, our own field insights from Karnataka showed that when it comes to the basic grant, which is about 50% of the total, out of that 50% is reserved for certain areas like sanitation, water supply, and then other items. It came to our kind of a learning that some of the local bodies have already provided adequate services in these areas, which means when they are tied to these particular areas, they're not even in a position to utilize these grants. So given the fact that adequate kind of insight is available in this particular area, and then not being in a position to use that information in coming out with more recommendations on grants is completely a missed out opportunity, I feel. And this is something which needs to be taken up as a further kind of a research that can be taken up by the public finance scholars. I think there are many other issues, but I thought I'll just basically talk about some of these issues pertaining to the grants and the overall, the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission. Once again, I thank Dr. Joseph and the group for having given me this opportunity. Thank you very much. My apology for not being in a position to share the presentation. Suddenly, I realized in the morning that there is some problem with my camera. I couldn't fix it, actually. Thank you very much, Dr. Pinaki. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gayatri, for your presentation. So now the floor is open. So we have almost half an hour. So we have a lot of time. So we can. Yeah. Huh? Okay. Okay. So you have 15 minutes? 15 minutes? Okay. So we'll close it at 11:15. Yeah. Okay. So the floor is open for, yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I mean, this is with regard to the revenue deficit grant. And if you're looking at the action taken report, it is deferred. So, I mean, how is the political economy going to work out? Maybe they may come in the next year. I mean, it's question to all the audience. And regarding thing, so the expenditure that have been incurred earlier, because Odisha is a state that has historical legacies of getting, I mean, disasters, and the expenditure they have incurred maybe a decade or so that may have reduced the exposure now. So in a way, I mean, I don't know if Ram, please correct me, because the exposure thing is how much people who are being exposed to the risk, right? So in a way that is kindly contradicting the kind of thing. So that two things that I would like to ask.
Yes, Kiran.
My question is to Ashwati. Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. I have two clarificatory questions. I would like to pick your thoughts on it. One is, you seem to be a bit uncomfortable with the population being used because the argument is that at least one of them would be affected. And you are proposing that instead of population, you could take the proportion of population who have been exposed. Now, disasters itself are multi in nature, right? I mean, So do we really get data of people exposed for each of the disaster that the index has been computed? So don't you think that could be one of the reasons? Computationally, it could be a little difficult. That could be one of the reasons why they proxied by population instead of going ahead and trying to measure how many people have been affected by each disaster. That is one point. And do you have any alternative thoughts on that? And the second point is with respect to your concern regarding per capita income being used as as an inverse of vulnerability. Now, if not for per capita, do you have any alternative thoughts? For example, the logic would be that you have a higher per capita income means you have higher ability to withstand disasters, or vulnerability could be reduced. That could be the underlying logic behind it. And so, as you also showed that instead of population, they've replaced with poverty, they replaced with per capita income. Either of them would basically show the extent of vulnerability and their ability to cope with the disasters. So, is there a specific measure? And once you going forward, what you could also do is you could propose a measure, work it out, and how would the state's ranking change if you go with your own measure of instead of per capita income? These are two of my concerns. Thank you.
This is addressed to Dr. Ashwati. Firstly, congratulations for making such comprehensive presentation. I want to draw attention to that point about Odisha doing well in mitigation and being penalized for that. I think this is going in a usual way. You do well something, like 15th Finance Commission using the demographic performance was because of that, they claim that you do well and then you get penalized. But here, what could be done? Is there a way, states which have done well in mitigation, getting more on the other, there are these two items, no? Is there a way in getting that into the formula?
Perhaps we can start from the youngsters. The seniors can perhaps wait. Not from this session, next session. Youngsters to begin with. Then.
Yeah, Ashwati, thank you very much. Exactly yesterday was I was trying to drive the point that we need research in of the parameters which we talk about. When population we talked in 1951, and today entirely different state has changed. So thank you very much. Congratulations, and go ahead with this sort of a investigative research in the parameter itself. Now, two issues. One, in fact, I do not know whether you will know that state has submitted a special memorandum to 16th Finance Commission on the land use, disaster, and settlement management. And humbly submit, I was chairing that committee. So we submitted and we actually looked into all these issues. See, what happens is exposure we calculate with population, but exposure with the infrastructure, with the agricultural land. See, Odisha is, because we thought a population is happening. Same thing when we are facing here, we actually looking into that. So look, if you put that in, because that has to be built up and is a cost and all those things are involved. That is one. Second is, so we take the Kerala case, which is a multi-hazard prone. Now, multi-hazard prone, if you take the flood in Kerala does not come every year. But flood comes to Kerala every year in Kutanad. Okay. So all India level, we have roughly around 12 to 13% of Kerala area under flood zone. But if you take the Ganges, take the Bihar, take Assam, West Bengal, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, their percentage is higher. And that is very recurring. Every year West Bengal get the flood. So when you put the weightage to flood as 50%, then there's a chances, because all India level, if I am not correct, if I'm correct, around 40,000 area becomes the flooded area. But the rest of the area where flood is not a very important thing. So in that case, the other disaster should get a weightage. Can we make on that? Like okay, or leave it to the state, and state should be told that, okay, you give this ranking. These are the parameters you take it. Like say one of the item you included, that's a state specific hazard. So when there was a problem with us, Kerala, we faced what is called that soil piping. So national hazards, they came and we actually, pleaded, and finally they agreed, yes, in Kerala, you can have a state-specific hazard, which is called the soil piping, which is not seen in other places. So there are state specificities. So maybe, when you try to make the weightage, maybe state can come into to play a role to give that weightage. These two are submission. Thank you very much.
Questions? Youngsters, and then we'll come back to the youngest guys.
So I got included in that.
Any questions? Okay, please go ahead. We have 5 more minutes, so I have to give 2 minutes to you. Yeah.
Ma'am, this is not a question. Like when we are accounting for the losses in some kind of disasters, so there can be some disasters where there are death rates are very high. There won't be much infrastructure. Yeah, and some cases there are a lot of destruction in the case of infrastructure. So here in these measures and all, only the population exposure or the population vulnerability has been taken as a measurement. So how do we distinguish between the death or this infrastructure rebuilding and all?
See, two specific issue. See, Sumalada, you rightly mentioned that there is some gap filling grant for addressing this revenue deficit. It is right. But what is the guarantee that the political regime in the state may or may not use that for some kind of a really politicking, that kind of things there? That is a very serious issue one has to consider. And the disaster issue, what you mentioned that there, you see, the past expenditure experience, the past expenditure related the disaster, the issue is that there you see in some states, there may be some real accounting problem because of some kind of a public action, voluntary kind of involvement for that. And there should not be any proper accounting for that kind of a system there. In that kind of a states where social capital is very high and expenditure pattern may be something different, maybe public action and all forces, then that kind of a states also may lose. This is what made now. Thank you.
Very brief point. In fact, no, this is about getting penalized for good performance, and about which Narayana again added some more points. Now, this happens in the case of decentralization also. Earlier, some of the commissions recognized Kerala's good performance. That was an indicator. But now that is fully removed. So the decentralization track record of Kerala or other states are not being considered by the commission now. Now, in the case of Orissa and disaster, I think this particular point is very important because the preparedness against disaster doesn't mean that they are not spending money. Every time there is a threat, they may be spending money and preparing. Only thing is that they have prepared the ground rules for that. Like in Kerala, if the flood is coming, you are not going to get caught unawares now because there are mechanisms to cope up with. So you have already spent, and again the next flood comes. Tamil Nadu and Odisha, they are prepared and they spend a lot of money to avoid major disasters. So it is not that they are not spending money. So the requirement of cost is there, which will have to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Point number one, I think the heterogeneity of the country is actually the basic point on which the whole Finance Commission, the 51 context. But when it comes to revenue deficit grant, we tend to assume that all revenue deficit grants are same. What we argued in Visakhapatnam is that a state incurring revenue deficit on account of freebies, their own welfare measures, it's very different from incurring expenditure which contributes to the wider national development. So the the factors and forces that giving rise to revenue deficit of different states may be different. That has to be seen into account, taken into account. That is point number one. And second thing is, when Finance Commission was looking at this revenue deficit grant and invoking constitution, they were trying to see how it cannot be given. At the same time, when it was coming to get out to do away with cess and surcharges, they were trying to see how this can be taken. This kind of a differential approach of the constitution, using constitution, I don't know, there was something like a inbuilt bias in the constitution to save the interest more of the center of the union and than of the states is apparently evident if you carefully look through their sentences which they have used. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to add some points on the grants in aid in general. Actually, yesterday itself, Professor Pinaki explained that around 6 lakh crore gain for the union government from the reduction of this grants in aid. So actually in Kerala, we have received a little more, a 0.468 share in tax share. So everyone is happy that Kerala got much. But when you compare to the grants in aid portion, see, we can see that for the coming 5 years, from this 0.468 increase, Kerala will get only 37,000 crores as from the tax share. But coming to the grants in aid portion, already around 40,000 crores we got from revenue deficit grant in the last 15th Finance Commission. So actually there is no gain. In fact, it is not commensurating the earlier position. That is the thing. Even though we got 0.468, that's a very disappointing thing. And also another one more point regarding this. Okay, they have reduced the grants in aid. At least they could have considered some flexibility in the borrowing position. For that, they have taken last 3 years GSDP growth. Then based on that only 3% we can borrow. I think this is also very disappointing.
That is going on.
But this time they are very strictly focusing that thing. That is if it is in the current year, maybe we could have allocated a little more leverage we will get. That issue is there.
Future generation with more and more borrowing. Anyway, I think there is a bit of a confusion regarding this revenue deficit grants. There are two things. One is, I think revenue deficit grants should not be looked at in isolation. It's a part of the overall scheme of things. I mean, revenue deficit grants are given only basically to target things rather than it's a part of the, you need to look at tax devolution and deficit grants together. So I lost 37,000 crores is not the issue. Issue is overall what really has happened. I mean, that's something that, and on the issue of whether this should be used for my daughter's marriage or some other purpose, the issue is not really relevant. Important thing is that when the Finance Commission makes the assessment, it says which expenditures should be admissible, which are not admissible. There is a certain normative element that goes into. The question is how strong is the norms? Whether you are able to cover the entire, sort of profligacy in the scheme of things. There are areas, I mean, in fact, if you have seen over a period of time, if you have seen in the initial years, it was a complete gap filling. That means, there was not much of a norm was used. Over a period of time, it's been evolving. We have been developing. Now, the major, source of profligacy that gets in is from the borrowing. Because, see, I mean, you say that interest payment is a committed expenditure. So the past borrowing thing, continue to, so if we are able to control that sort of, so bring in certain things, particularly when you have the FRBM Act in place, and if you don't give, sort of borrowing from HUDCO is free, borrowing from NABARD is free, sort of a thing. If you don't do that, Because I still believe that macroeconomic stabilization is definitely a central function and they have to do it. And they have to control borrowing, overall control of the country. Now, if you do that, there is a certain amount of norm that you are already putting into the borrowing, borrowing. And then you can, there is this particular thing goes. I mean, it's an evolving thing it has to do. But to throw the baby and retain the bathwater by saying that I will not give the revenue deficit grant, I think is not. Again, this has also evolved from the 15th Finance Committee. It has come down. So I think it's a way of doing better normative assessment. And if you are not able to do a normative assessment, the solution is not that I will throw the thing out. And that's the thing that I wanted to say. And this development of the norm is the most important thing. And what happened in the one other thing that I want to say, once you give the grant or once you give the tax devolution, it is nobody's business to say how the money should be used. A government which is elected by the people has to decide how the expenditure has to be incurred. No, you may not take that into your account. That is the reason why it is called the general purpose grant. You are giving only enabling. You are only enabling the thing. You are not ensuring that this must be done and that must be done. And that has to be done through the specific purpose grant. And that is the reason why in the literature, if you see, there's a whole lot of work that is going on what is called the flypaper effect. The whole literature on flypaper effect has come because in a median voter model, giving general purpose grant is equivalent to giving lump sum money. If I have that much of additional income, how do I spend that income? I mean, it is left to me. It's not left to not left to anybody else. So, I mean, there are issues of that nature. So, I think once we give the general purpose grant, it is for the elected government to decide how to do it. You may decide that this is a particular item of expenditure. The national taxpayer should not bear it, and therefore, you can take it. That's the issue that I wanted to say.
Okay, 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes is fair.
I'll try. Thank you for all the questions. Yeah, thank you for all the provocative questions, thought-provoking questions, in fact. I would pick up the point from Dr. Nirmal and Dr. Kiran on exposure point. Okay, first of all. So basically, the taking the relative share of population, why I'm having a problem, because as per the theory, you can be exposed to a disaster, but not necessary that you will be vulnerable to a disaster. So vulnerability, proper vulnerability interacted with the exposure will give you a proper measure. So that is why hazard-prone population will be an accurate measure for that. Certainly, there is a problem with the data. So regarding each one, like hazard, you will have to, find out the data sources, and we don't have the technological advancement in that. Okay, yeah. So second thing is about the per capita income, why the problem is. So per capita, again, vulnerability is also a composite index. Okay, so that will be taking into account, as per the theoretical backing, that will be taking into account the socio-economic vulnerability. So vulnerability proxied by per capita income may not be an accurate measure. If you go by NDMA's vulnerability measure, which is not updated now. So way back in 2018, they have done a composite vulnerability index. So which is actually a comprehensive vulnerability index containing almost more than 80 plus indicators. So categorizing it into socio-economic and various other categories. So that would be an appropriate measure. And also IPCC's framework, they have a ratio that sensitive, it is a ratio between the sensitive index and your adaptive capacity index. So coming to Professor Dina Rana's question on like penalizing the performers. So basically, when you have this allocation pattern, 80-20 is for the 80 is for the relief and response, and 20 is for the mitigation. So I was also wondering on the same point. See, 20% mitigation won't be suffice. Will not be sufficient to address all the mitigation and adaptive capacity. It has to come through states' developmental expenditure activities and all. So why don't they drop that 20% and add performance as a criteria here itself so that you can allocate more effectively and justifiably to the states? Sri Kumar sir's question, actually that explanation also added to the discussion on the exposure part of it. Flooding, why are you getting the maximum weightage? Because they are taking into account the past expenditure. So that is the reason why we are getting the maximum thing. And definitely I will look into that, the geographical perspective of your question. And Sona's question regarding exposure and vulnerability. So that is basically the definition between the definitional difference between the vulnerability and the exposure. And that is the reason why they have interacted exposure and vulnerability. So if you are taking the additive formula, so a person who is vulnerable, exposed, but not vulnerable is also getting some amount of allocation, right? So in the multiplicative formula, you have to equally have vulnerability as well as exposure to get that allocation. So it is an interactive thing. And definitely it is about, not only about the life, but also about the physical infrastructure also. And that there comes the relevance of exposure, because exposure, it is not about the human life. It can be your assets, then any kinds of physical infrastructure pertaining to your economy and all those things. Regarding Professor Jose Chathukulam's, I actually acknowledge, that in some of the states, they have public action, and like how we have it in Kerala, CMDRF and all those things. So they may not be incurring that much of expenditure, but that is they consider it as a top up. So whatever is given by the state and the center, when it is not sufficient, they consider it as a top up. So they have not considered those kinds of local support when it comes to the expenditure side. Harlal sir's question on preparedness, I guess I have already answered that, because they have to drop that mitigation effort from the formula, and if they are adding it to the allocation criteria itself as a performance, this thing, that would have been a great thing. Yeah, thank you. I hope I have addressed all questions.
Thank you.
I don't have answers as such, but I have one point to say. I completely agree with the point that the nature of revenue deficit of the various states, that has to be taken into account. That has to be taken into account, and also the structural and the historical context that states are having the revenue deficit over a period of time. So the states are now left with rationalizing the expenditure to come down and to reduce their revenue deficit. So that is again going to affect their development sector. So that is the concern I have in this context. Thank you.
Professor Gayatri. Professor Gayatri.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say, but I only thanks to Professor Govindrao and Dr. Joseph for the clarifications on RDG. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to.
Professor Pinaki, we cannot hear you. Yeah.
No, what I said was that Shuma made a reference to the tax devolution number in the budget and for the year 26-27 and the tax devolution number for the same year projected by the Finance Commission, and the one that is reported in the budget is 1 lakh crore less than what was given in the Finance Commission report. I think this is also because what Dr. D.K. Srivastava yesterday said, that for 26-27, the buoyancy was 1.96 assumed by the Finance Commission, and that is making this difference. So in the first year itself, I think the estimation went haywire. So that is, yeah, yes.
That happened in the past.
No, not at this level. 14th, 15th, I think almost the same report. No, sir, 1 lakh crore is a huge number in a 10 lakh crore rupees, 20% difference almost. Yeah, but then the question on the question of what is allowable subsidies, what is not, I don't agree with this view that each state's revenue deficit is different and that has to be compensated by a separate grant. I think that doesn't work. So in that context, I think we need to, as Professor Rao mentioned, Finance Commissions in the past have taken expenditures that are allowable and kind of comparable across states. You may agree with those norms, you may disagree with those, then applied some norms and got some number and that money was given. Now this time, no assessment of that was also done. So that is a fundamental issue. It is not about the level of revenue deficit of a state. It's an error that needs to be discussed. So the fundamental question is, how do you mitigate this error? Now nothing can be done. Yeah. So how do I think the kind of issues that will arise going forward, the center will probably have to come in and give some grants to some states. That's the only way out. So that is the second thing. No, I agree with the fact that there is a need-based assessment to be done after tax devolution, and if there is a problem, that has to be compensated. And fiscal roadmap for the deficit and debt. I think there was some comment Dr. Gayatri made. I think there is a fundamental difference between the management of state's deficit and center's deficit. Because center has moved to a target called debt target. They said they will reach debt target by 50% of GDP by 2030-31. Finance Commission has given a fiscal deficit target, which center's FRBM does not require to follow. That is the first thing. So Finance Commission did not even consider what center has done in 25-26. So that is the first thing. Second thing, the definition used by the Finance Commission is from debt is from the statement of liabilities. Statement of liabilities take debt data at historical exchange rate, but FRBM definition of debt is different. So Finance Commission, I don't know, I may use the word, deliberately started with a low number for center's debt. They have said the state's debt will go up. This is again contrary to the trend that we have observed in case of aggregate state debt. So this whole issue of debt and deficit, where there is already an asymmetry introduced by the center, where center itself is targeting debt, not the deficit, and asking the states to follow the deficit target, and then Finance Commission then not commenting on that, giving a different debt target, which is again 47%. Given the global uncertainty, center really cannot come down to 47% now. Now, if all these things are pushed onto the state that you correct more because I cannot really correct, then it will actually create more contraction at the state level. Thank you. No.
So we'll close the session for tea now. We'll come back at 11:45 sharp for the next session.
Thank you.